spite of all our communication technology, no invention is as effective as the sound of the human voice. When we hear the human voice, we instinctively want to listen in the hopes of understanding it, even when the speaker is searching for the right words to say. That's because the human voice resonates differently from everything else in the world. This is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. Listen in on candid conversations with creative entrepreneurs and insanely interesting people.
In this episode, my friend Dave Ursillo returns to the show to share his story about grit and persistence that resulted in the turnaround of a business that was on the brink of failure. Dave, thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Hey, Srini. Thanks so much for hosting me. It's awesome to chat with you again. I mean, our paths cross enough throughout the years, on and off, whether we're at a conference or just bumping into each other on the street in New York or LA. But it's really great to be back with you. And like you said, I mean, the first time we chatted on what was Blogcast FM 2 years ago, I mean, it feels like 5 years ago. I feel like another human being ago. I think we talked right around when I published my first book in 2011, and just the amount of challenges, but also just amazing moments that have come since then. They've all been really hard fought, but I'm really excited to just share as much of the story and the advice, and so that people don't have to go through the 4 to 5 years of struggle like I did. That's what it's all about right now. I'm just trying to help people who are passionate creatives and dreamers and visionaries who want to help people and also live their lives more aligned to their value system and really making the journey the reward. And to be able to do that without, like we said, Streety, like struggling for 3, 4, 5 years before you can support yourself or actually create impact with people. So that's what I'm here for, and I'm really happy to be back.
Awesome. Well, let's do this. Let's take a few steps back. I want to get into the really early part of your journey because, I mean, obviously our show has grown a lot since you've been here. So, I mean, let's really start at the very beginning and kind of how all of your life, your story, your journey has led you to doing the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, man, it's a great question. And the short story that I usually tell people is that I come from the world of politics and public service. I was 15 years old on September 11th, 2001, and I was growing up here in a very nice suburban area in the home state of Rhode Island. And, you know, I, like many high school age kids at the time, watched 2 planes fly into 2 buildings and thousands of people die live on TV. And it was at a time when I was really starting to become politically conscious, or just conscious of the world and of people. And when I watched this event, it really cemented in my brain the want to help people, the want to be a solution, like a force of love and service and good leadership to help people in a world that really appeared to need it. And I spent 9 years of my life or actually probably like 8 years, 9 years through high school, college, and beyond, trying to find a career path that validated that feeling that I felt. And I tried to find a career path in politics and public service. I dabbled with the idea of going into the military as an officer in the United States Army. I thought about journalism, became editor-in-chief of my student newspaper, Holy Cross, in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I became a White House intern in 2008 under the Bush administration, and ultimately started working in 2009 as a body man, which is kind of a catch-all position for a right-hand man, a personal driver, personal assistant, schedule keeper, phone call screener, driver, just like the whole 9 yards for a campaigning politician in 2009. And this was I was like 1 year out of college. I had a job that by every indication was a really good job. It was a state job, which, I mean, my boss was a political office holder, so I kind of was dependent on that, on him winning to maintain my job and position. But other than that, it was a state job which came with benefits, and it's a secure job for the most part. And but that funny thing that we call the quarter-life crisis began to settle in when I was a year out of college. I had all this piss and vinegar in me and these dreams and really wanting to change the world and just like, do something with my life right now that would feel like I was doing more than just waiting to help people. and being told that I needed to wait 10 or 20 or 30 years before I could start helping people because I wasn't wealthy enough. I didn't own enough. I wasn't powerful enough. My job title wasn't good enough. And that really burned a hole in my sides. And I only lasted a few months in that job because I was riddled with depression. I was dealing with anxiety, and my body was just shutting down. And I was losing faith in myself. And for someone like me, Srini, that I've never been the top of the class type of personality. I'd never been top of the class type of talent. Like I don't overflow with the raw genius intelligence. I've always had to fight for just getting to the middle of the pack. I was at a place in my life where I could feel the only thing that had ever kept me going, which was my self-belief, just the raw belief that no matter what I was doing, and even though I never knew how I was going to figure it out, whether it was getting an internship at the White House, becoming editor-in-chief of my student newspaper, just all these like little strides of success, these little moments of victories where I felt like I was making ends meet. When I felt that self-belief start to die, and I describe it like it being an acorn, just like that little acorn in the pit of my stomach where I just knew something could sprout from this place if I believed in it. When that acorn started to wither and die, I just knew I had to escape. I knew that I needed to give myself a fighting chance to do something with my life. And I knew I had writing in my back pocket. It's always been my passion. I had a dream of writing a book on leadership to inspire people to be leaders in their everyday lives. And I just knew that I could do more with less than waiting 10 or 20 years, fighting my way through a system, playing games in business, playing games in politics, to be validated or given permission to help people. And I just believe that I could lead without followers in my life based upon how I lived it, and a lot of dedication and a lot of just manufacturing love and service. And that's when I decided to quit my job. That was 4.5 years ago, and I started a blog and started to try to figure something out.
Mm-hmm. All right, so ton of stuff here. Let's do this. You've heard me say this 1,000 times. Let's take a few steps back. I want to get to the very beginning of this. So one of the things that's interesting to me is that you kind of knew at an early age that you felt compelled or drawn to sort of this mission or message of serving other people. And, how it played itself out, obviously, has happened in a bunch of different ways, which we'll get into. But I think that this is something that comes up over and over again. I mean, for you to realize it at a young age is actually, I think, an anomaly. And as you work with people, and as you have these people in the workshops and retreats you're doing, all of which we'll talk about, how do you uncover that with them? I mean, especially when you're older and you've gotten to this point of sort of just sleepwalking through your life.
Yeah, it's a great question, Srini, because ultimately when I talk to people and I ask them questions about what they're looking for, what they want, what they need, what they desire, whether it's creatively in a book, and there's usually like that one project or that one nugget, that one belief, that one line, that one idea that we always go back to. And sometimes, to go back to the acorn idea, that thing is an acorn, and it gets topsoil gets thrown on it, and leaves fall on it, and these are just the layers of our life that as we go on, all these different things get in the way. And I think that by striving to unearth whatever that acorn is through the course of conversation, and for me, writing is a really powerful method, a very personal, powerful method that I encourage people to engage in, to dig deep into their core and to dig deep into their soul. And it's usually through the course of conversation, as I was saying, me questioning, because it always takes those questions that we're asked, and they profoundly stump us, to ask them what it is they're really looking for, or what it is that they're afraid they don't already know about themselves or about what they want.
Yeah, I think that, what's interesting is I think that often when we start with those questions, we want these sort of immediate answers. And I think that rather than looking for answers, I think really what we have to do is we have to treat these questions as sort of an inquiry and a journey into who we are, because it's like, it's like, hey, here's an opportunity to get to know yourself. And it's terrifying because, often what you'll uncover can be very uncomfortable.
Yeah, and you know what it is, Srini, is that, like I said, in the course of conversation or in the course of writing, but I mean, when I'm working with somebody and I'm talking to them, in the course of a conversation, you start to use certain words and you start to say things in a certain way. You start telling a story, just kind of like I told this long-winded story to kick off our conversation, and you start noticing patterns of word usages, and you start noticing those little tiny disclaimers that people will place around their ideas or what they want or what their passion is, and they'll say, I'm just an aspiring writer, instead of saying I love to write. And through the course of conversation, you can really start to dissect exactly where somebody's mindset is, where their own self-belief rests, and where they're challenged. And you can start to hear, actually, through the course of their word usages, their sentences, their paragraphs, the values that they hold dear about what they want most, and how, not even what they want most, that's the wrong thing to say, but how they want what they want. And the core beliefs, the values that we strive to live by every day, that really define our overarching experience in life. I don't just want to write a book and for it to be a bestseller, Srini. I want to write a book my way, and I want that bestseller someday to read in a way that feels a certain way to somebody. It can't just be, it's not just about those details, about the outcomes, the end goals. I really, as an artist, I want it to feel a certain way. I want my own experience to feel a certain way. And so these are the things that really come out when we're talking to one another in the course of conversation. When we dig deep enough, I start to notice those trends, those habits, those patterns, and it really starts to, if you can just reflect them back, that's really my job. I just reflect back what you're telling me. I reflect back the things that you kind of automatically say, that you automatically think, and just shedding a little bit of light, a little awareness on those words and those values really start to help somebody realize what that acorn is that's lying underneath that debris.
Yeah, no, this is brilliant, and I'll throw in one tactical thing for those of you guys. You may think, okay, this all sounds really sort of new agey and psychobabble, but we'll give you a tactic that you can use. Danielle Laporte talks about this in the Firestarter sessions. Go out and have somebody interview you, and you'll be kind of blown away by what you uncover. I mean, part of why I'll often go back and listen to conversations where I've been interviewed is I uncover a lot of threads for content, for newsletters. I mean, a lot of sort of my core values I've realized have been articulated. And the thing is, we take that for granted because it's so second nature to us to tell our story. It's like, oh, okay, well, whatever. There's nothing in that. But when you sit down and you tell your story, and again, really, I think that if you sit down and write out what your story is, a lot of the language that Dave is talking about will become very apparent. And often what you don't realize is that language creates a context, and maybe your language is creating a very limiting context. And once you start to let go of that, a lot of things will start to open up.
Absolutely, Srini. And another practical thing when I talk about, the literal process of writing for me has always been that kind of first step of understanding what I actually think, feel, and believe, which seems obvious enough. But I mean, the first time I actually realized that what I was writing on paper was what I was choosing to believe, and thus that the story that I told about myself in my head, or I told to someone like Srini Rao, is a matter of choice that I was really kind of shaping in a very, very, very real, tangible, practical way. There's no there's no psychobabble about it. I was literally shaping what the reality was that I was living. And it's the type of thing where if you apply it to something like we used to talk about brand, like creating your first blog platform or your brand, the words you use to describe yourself is going to attract certain people or dissuade certain people from paying attention or getting on board. So it's really that simple, that the words that you use really matter, because we're not living in bubbles. We're living amongst other human beings, and what they hear us say and how they hear us tell our stories about what we want or what we need. Whether it's a huge dream, a lifelong dream, writing a book, a bestseller, or just saying like I need to go to the supermarket for X, Y, and Z. It's not what you say that matters. It's what people hear.
Love that. I think that's brilliant. Well, let's do this. Let's switch gears a little bit, and let's talk about sort of your experience as both as the editor-in-chief of the newspaper and as a White House intern, because I think that there's a sense of public service that I'm finding as a theme throughout everything you do, and I want to talk about that and how it's applied to everything that you do now. But I'm really curious, kind of, about lessons learned from working with somebody in politics and working as the editor-in-chief of a newspaper that have sort of influenced and shaped everything that you do today? Like, what are things that are sort of timeless lessons that you've brought forward with you?
Yeah, those are great questions, Srini. And it's, honest to God, I don't think I've been asked them maybe ever, or if it has been such a long time. That it's a really interesting topic to open up. I mean, for being an editor-in-chief of a student newspaper, I was a co-editor-in-chief with a friend of mine. Her name was Mia Martinez, and she's a lawyer now. And that's a interesting coincidence because Mia and I were actually the subject of we were named in a federal lawsuit against our college. We were co-defendants in a discrimination case that was levied against our alma mater back in about probably 2007. And the case was ultimately dismissed. It was baseless. But what happened, and this is probably the biggest lesson that I've learned, is Mia interviewed an employee of our college at the time to ask him about this program that was run. It was kind of basically billed as an affirmative action sort of an organization, and it was meant to help acclimate students of color because my school was predominantly kind of like a white Catholic school, and that was the image of it. So it dissuaded, so the school thought, students of color from applying and wanting to become members of the college. So this program was established to kind of help acclimate students of color, and Mia was Hispanic, and she was invited to become a part of the program. Long story short, she wrote an article about this program, and the man that she interviewed threatened to sue her for libel because he didn't like the way that he was portrayed in the article, which was a piece of reporting. A year goes by, nothing happens, the man's contract is not renewed by the school, and he believes that he was quote-unquote fired, even though it was an expired contract. And he believes that he was fired because he was a man of color. So he went to a lawyer and filed this discrimination lawsuit against the college and named all these people. And Mia and I, as editors-in-chief of the student newspaper, were co-defendants. So let me tell you, when you get a letter from a federal bureau naming you in a lawsuit mentioning racial discrimination, it is not a great day, especially when you tell your father, who is a lawyer, that this is happening. It was a really terrible sort of an experience, but I think that in terms of public service and being in a place of responsibility really forced me, who was only 21 years old at the time, to understand the gravity of what it means to be in a position of power, but more so what it means to be in a position where everything you say and everything that you don't say can be used against you just as much as it is used to praise you or hold you up. And that was a really, that's the type of thing where I wanted to scream. I wanted to take that newspaper and write every article about this guy and just trash him. Of course, it would be counterproductive. It would be morally wrong. But it was the type of thing where I had to sit and know that I was being sued for something I didn't do wrong and just bite it, just take it.
Interesting. So one question comes from that because, we're talking about, you talked about being in a position of power. And in many ways, all of us are in a position of power, a position in which we can share our opinions and our voices because of the canvases that we're operating with. Me in the form of podcasting, you in the form of books and blogs and writing. And what I'm curious about is maintaining the balance between that and being opinionated and authentic.
So the balance between being responsible with the power that you have and being authentic, essentially.
Because you could take this whole responsibility thing and you can say, you know what, the question where I'm trying to go with this is that can become paralyzing and cause you to play it really safe. And I can tell you, I did that for a very long time. There are always these things you're afraid to talk about, and I know I can tell you the moment I started talking about the things I thought would be the end of me, those are the things that changed everything.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's a great point, Srini, and it's the type of thing where I felt in light of that moment and being in the field of politics and being a White House intern, and this was when I was a White House intern. It was before Twitter. It was before Twitter was a big deal. It was before Facebook was as big as it is. So I feel really lucky that I didn't ever have to put myself in a position where I was, compromising my image or an image that reflected a politician or a state or federal office that I was a part of. So I was lucky in that regard. But I think at the end of the day, you really have to be true to yourself in saying what you believe, but what you have to always be cognizant of the fact that what you say is going to be heard. And in today's modern age, what is heard doesn't just disappear. That the things that we were ultimately quote unquote sued for were kind of this like academic bullshit. And it's the part of the stuff that goes on in big business. But the things that you talk about now, if you talk about today on a blog, on a TEDx stage, in a book, you always have to be cognizant of the fact that what you say is going to be heard, it's going to be remembered, it's going to be reprinted, it's going to be saved by the annals of history and by the internet. For me, I to be honest with you, Srini, I never think about that story unless somebody asks me about it. Mm-hmm. It's never stopped me from saying something that I believe in. Because ultimately what I believe in saying and preaching and sharing and teaching and leading doesn't have to do with other people, like individuals and their actions. And I really think that is a reflection of what I believe. Like, I strive to lead by example. I strive to use myself as an example, not that I'm any better than anybody else, but I'm just constantly trying to push myself to that place where I can say, this is the experience I've had. This is how I failed. This is how I fucked up. This is how I fell down on my face. This is how I struggled to make money for 3 years as a self-employed entrepreneur. This is how my first book, I never liked it, and I knew that critics who shit on it were right, but I couldn't say that out loud. It's constantly what I strive to do for myself, and this is the advice that I would give to somebody who's listening, is don't make the life you're trying to live about anybody else, and you don't give them your power. Mm-hmm. Just if you can, and it sounds like it's dangerously egocentric to say something like that, but in truth is, the life that you're striving to lead, if you're trying to better yourself, you're trying to make a business for yourself, you're trying to help people, it's about the effect, the positive effects, that loving effect, and crafting a legacy of love that lasts far beyond the reach of anything that you can see. But if you pick enemies and you pick villains and you make it about them, almost like politicians do, where they don't campaign about themselves, they campaign about how terrible the other person is, they're giving every ounce of their power away because they're making it about something that they're not. And that's the situation that I had to experience in college as editor-in-chief was, we chose to mention somebody by name and we shouldn't have even done it, because that gave him the power to sue us for libel. And it was thrown out, but we still gave him that opportunity.
Love it. Okay, so a lot of good stuff here. So let's do this. I want to start getting into sort of the piece of where, the journey starts in terms of the entrepreneurship piece and deciding to quit your job. But rather than sort of recognizing that moment of knowing, hey, it's time to make a change, because I think we've really belabored that point quite a bit in many episodes. I don't want to spend too much time on that.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm a bit more interested in sort of this whole idea of knowing that, hey, I'm going to lead without followers. I mean, I think that takes sort of that takes a leap of faith and sort of a radical mindset shift to say, you know what, I'm so worthy that I can go and I can lead without followers. Like, how do you get yourself there? And then we're going to talk about the part that I really want to get into, which is kind of the 4-year journey of struggle and then turning it around.
Yeah. Absolutely, man, and that's the stuff I really love to talk about too. So I'll keep it short and sweet. But the lead without followers concept, like I said, I believed in my heart of hearts that I could do something small, profoundly small, unnoticed, no fanfare, not multi-millions of dollars, not the next Facebook, not the next Malcolm Gladwell. I believe I could do something within myself that was enough. And it starts as small as a smile on the street to a stranger. That was like the one thing that I always knew that I could give to somebody, even if they didn't smile back. And I would call that leadership, because the effect of what that ounce of giving can do could change somebody's life. And just the ability to change somebody's life, just the ability to just the opportunity to be grateful, to share love and positivity with people was enough for me to say, I know I can do something small. And the philosophy that I began to share in my first book, which we talked about 2 years ago, was not so much to lead in spite of people. Actually, it wasn't that at all. I wasn't leading in spite of people or leading in spite of making enough money to support yourself, or leading in spite of attention, in spite of the stage. It was just making sure that you're personally focused on the intangibles that go into your actions and your efforts and your dreams. And those intangibles are selflessness and humility and goodness, that you're not going to get corrupted, not allow yourself to get corrupted by vast amounts of wealth and the allure of being just famous and everybody knowing you and being a celebrity. Because we think, Srini, as you and I both know, we think that the more popular we become, the more readers we have, the more subscribers we have, that everything will become easier then. That's what we tell ourselves when we're on the outside looking in. And we'll look to someone like my friend Danielle Laporte, and we'll say, damn, Danielle's got it all figured out. If I could just be in her position, everything would be easier. And I swear to God, if you ask Danielle, I'm sure she would say, it gets more complicated the longer you go. And the difficult part is that when you get into a place where you have followers and fans and tons of money coming in, all those things can really change how you begin behaving, and all those intangibles that I talked about begin to shift. And sometimes you start from a place of wanting to be selfless, a selfless leader who helps people, and you want to put out an amazing product that really changes people's lives. And suddenly it becomes about, that next book, that next product you put out there, how are you going to make twice as much money as the first one? And those are those subtle little things that if you don't stay focused on your priorities, it's not to say that money is bad or followers are bad, because it's not about that. But you really need to stay focused on the intentional actions, the intentional emotion that's going into what you're striving to do.
I love this. You're hitting some of my favorite hot buttons. I love that you brought up this idea of intangibles and character change and all of that, because you're right. I mean, if I went into my next book trying to replicate what happened with my most recent one,
yeah,
I'd be doomed from the start. And I mean, there's the likelihood of that happening again. I can honestly tell you it's probably not that high.
Right.
And I have to be okay with that. And I am. I've come to terms with the fact that probably won't happen. Maybe again for another 5 or 6 years. Maybe it won't happen again for the rest of my life. I mean,
right. And that's the type of thing, Srini, where you have to say, I know that the effect of this next book is totally outside my control, because it depends on the one who's listening to us talk right now and others just like him or her. It's totally outside of our control. So what can I go back to? What are my, like we talked about before, what are my values? What is the effect that I'm striving to create in that one single soul that might have maybe it will have an effect on 2 souls instead of 1, but maybe it'll just be that one. And that's what you really need to focus on. And what I notice oftentimes with a lot of people, I mean, this all goes back to the politics days, is that I believe that 99% of people who get into politics and public service have the best intentions. And I believe that they were a lot like me, where I just wanted to do good and help people and be a positive force of change in the world. And then you start making compromises, because sometimes it's necessary to play the game, because sometimes you need to get that position, that higher, over your competitor if you're really going to get to that place. And you can make excuses until you're blue in the face, but it's just about, I think, how much compromising are you willing to stomach. But yeah, for us being creatives now, it really goes back to, you have to go back to the absolute core of why you do what you do and what you're hoping to create in that human being.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this makes sort of a perfect setup to talk about where we left off last time we had you here, which was your first book. And it's interesting to hear you talk about this process, and then, even tell me earlier on in our conversation that admitting to yourself that, because I remember part of what impressed me about your first book wasn't necessarily the content, but you had the mechanics nailed down, and it's amazing that you could nail the mechanics of a self-published launch perfectly. Because I remember when you showed me the book, and I thought, wow, you've printed this beautifully, you've done all these things, and then to admit to yourself that, hey, the critics are right, this isn't my best work, but more importantly, that you may have compromised in this process. And I'm curious, kind of talk to me about that, because I know this book didn't really live up to the hope that you'd had for it.
Yeah, Srini. And so my first book was called Lead Without Followers. It came out in September of 2011, and I wrote it in 84 days. And I wrote it because I believed that the idea was ready. Well, I believed that the idea was ready enough to be heard. And I was being encouraged. My blog, I've been writing a blog for 2 years at the time at daveursillo.com, and this was like the overarching thesis, the theory, my belief, my philosophy was lead without followers. And I had this idea for a book for so long, for years before, and was just being encouraged by people, just write it, just do it. So I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I put the highest of expectations that any human being could ever possibly think of on that book project, because it's all, going back to that idea of self-belief, there's probably a very fine line between self-belief and just, delusion, exactly the word I was going to use. Yeah, delusion. And, I had really high hopes for myself, and I believed in myself, and I was hoping that showing up once in my first book would be enough to give me the rewards I was hoping for. And what I learned from this book process, this was like the number one lesson that I learned. It's what I've told you about before, Srini, when we've been hanging out, is that showing up is required, but it doesn't promise you a damn thing. Showing up is just fundamental. Showing up every day and doing the work, showing up every day and pumping out your books, your blog posts, your artwork, your podcasts out into the world, whatever it is that you create is just a prerequisite. And nobody is going to reward you for just showing up, because just showing up is a battle with self-belief. And what I didn't know at the time, I said that I had self-belief, but what I didn't know at the time, Srini, was that my first book project in that 84-day writing marathon and publishing it, and then after publishing it, watching the fallout and getting, making some money, getting some praise, getting some talk, some speaking gigs, but also getting criticism and emails from people that I thought were friends, basically shitting all over me, saying that your book isn't good, you need to rewrite it, in a really malicious, unnecessary way, and the shitty Amazon reviews versus the nice Amazon reviews, and on it goes. It's just, that was the self-belief battle. That was me actually having to choose myself and to actually say, maybe my book wasn't meant to be like giving me the keys to my kingdom. It was just my first audacious act of self-belief in what I thought had been a life of self-belief. But that's something that you learn when you first put that one truly deeply meaningful idea that we call that the baby, it was my baby. You put it out into the world, and you realize how vulnerable you are and how you feel so out of control. But the good side of that is, Srini, that my first book totally changed me as a human being. It totally changed me as an artist, because not only did I feel like I was truly an artist, but the reason I felt that in the first place was because when I published that first book and I put it out there and I dealt with all that shit I just told you about, I suddenly felt totally connected to every other creative, every other writer, every other speaker, every other artist, every other human being who's ever done anything that mattered to them and struggled. I felt bound by every artist. I suddenly looked at paintings on the street being sold by a vendor, books on the bookshelf, blog posts that people were putting out. I couldn't look at it all the same way, because no longer was I judging that work through the lens of my opinions, because I ran the gamut as the author of experiencing what it was like for people to use their own opinions as using me as a whipping board for their opinions. And anonymous strangers feeling like they were entitled to just fucking brutal, just lambast a stranger through a computer screen because they didn't like the book. Like, okay, you don't have to like the book. I don't like that painting on your wall, but I'm not going to tear you down for it or the artist who did it. And so the whole process, Srini, to really sum it up, was that I changed because I felt like I became an artist, but I became an artist by feeling deeply connected, resonant, empathetic, compassionate to everyone else who had ever created anything. And it changed the way I looked at products. It changed the way I looked at services. It changed the way I looked at anything that could be created. And suddenly, I think by walking through that fire really helped me to understand what it would take to actually write a book that I could be proud of.
So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are clean every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites, so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable.
Mm-hmm. I love this, man. This is just pure golden poetry. It's genius. I'm so glad. That's why I didn't say a word. I think you have brought up some very critical points, and I love that you brought up that anybody who's created anything goes through this. And I can tell you, you mentioned the shitty Amazon reviews and strangers who vilify you. It doesn't matter whether your book sells 10 copies or thousands, you're going to get those people. I have 1-star reviews and I'm like, most of them are personal attacks on you. Yeah. But that's the thing. I mean, but I think to me, the thing that really sort of stands out is this idea of empathy and not viewing other people's creations through the lens of your own opinions. That's profound. That is truly profound and thought-provoking. I mean, there's really no tactic there, but it's just, I think that to me, really, in my mind, is going to push people's buttons a lot and really get them to open up. And I think, you're going to show us a side of ourselves that a lot of us are scared. And I love how you took, you called it this first audacious act of self-belief. And those acts really, honestly, every one of them is so critical to your growth. Each thing, you guys are listening to this in 2014. 2013 was a series of those, and constantly, wondering, even with enough self-belief to put it out there, but constantly thinking, holy crap, people might not like this, or nobody's going to come to the party that I'm throwing.
Yeah, absolutely, Srini. And here's the funny part. I'm gonna pop quiz you real quick, okay? So, what was the name of my second book?
See, I don't even know. So you got
exactly, but it's good. It's good because that makes my point exactly. Because what happened after my first book, in the fallout of dealing with this, and I traveled around the country and I was doing speaking gigs and stuff, in spite of it, not being my best work. And how could it be? Think about the finger paintings and the drawings you did as a kid that were of your parents. I call them refrigerator monsters. Mm-hmm. And you drew these pictures of your parents. And there's like an arm coming out of someone's eye socket, and the head is like half the size of the page, and they got little twig legs, and they're just monstrous. But you hung those on the refrigerator, and your parents were like, good job. And you were proud of them because it was the best you could do. I mean, where the hell, somebody who's just not an abundance of intelligence, I'm not a genius, I've had no real worldly experience at the time when I first wrote this book, where the hell else could I have gone but to make that book my first refrigerator monster and make it that audacious act of self-belief. But here's the point I was going to make, Srini, which is my second book was written in the fallout of my first book. Just about nobody knows about it, like if I'm being interviewed, unless they look it up, because it's called God Whispers on the Wind. Mm-hmm. It's a collection of 81 spiritual poems. I published it in August 2012, and I did it. You mentioned that process, that self-publishing launch process and getting all the mechanics of it right. I did the exact opposite, where I didn't tell anybody. I just kind of put it out there. It didn't get a landslide of attention, but the attention that it did get from readers, they were They loved it. It still sells. I still make money from it. I probably have had more readers from God Whispers on the Wind than I ever had from Lead Without Followers. It's being sold at my local yoga studio, amongst others that I know of. It's read at the end of yoga classes across the nation. Not a whole lot, but enough to be able to say that. And it's funny because I am so proud of that book. I would have loved to have gone through this major. Actually, I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have. I didn't want to go through that process again. I didn't want to build expectations and promote and market. I just wanted to write a book there were these really spiritual, liberally styled, kind of like just like out there in the ethos sorts of poems, very reminiscent of if you've read any of Hafez, the Daniel Ladinsky translations. I really was inspired by that sort of styling and the word usage, and making poems that made people feel good about God in a very a-religious, nonpartisan sort of way, just by feeling connected to another human being. So, and it's funny because the process was so different, and I'm so proud of that book, and I'm still so proud of it. And that was the second one, and it's just funny because for me, there's never been any other way to figure out what I want more of than to like fail and fuck up and realize what I don't want. Mm-hmm. And now I have that second book and that first book to kind of compare and contrast how I work and create and live my life.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly why I wanted to have you here, because our stories around publishing are so parallel. I mean, we did the first blog to book deal book, and I did exactly what we're saying is the mechanics, all of that, and then the Small Army Strategy came out, and I didn't make this huge fanfare about it. I just told 25 or so people, I said, hey, I have this book. Do you want a review copy? And I was like, that's it, I'm done. And then I sent my I was like, I wrote this book for my people. That's it. And I think the other sort of critical part that you brought up, to me, what it sounds like is that you enjoyed doing the second book so much more. Like you actually took joy in creating it, whereas the first one sounds like largely it was to serve your ego and to have all these accolades. And it's something that I feel that I've experienced personally too. I mean, would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, and it's accurate, and it's ironic because the book was called Lead Without Followers, and it was about leading without followers. And then I kind of had to eat my own philosophy, and that's where I let go of a lot, and started to actually live the philosophy and explore what it meant without having to talk about it in book form. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
So I think this makes a perfect setup. Let's do this. Let's start talking about how things start to turn around, because one of the things that I've witnessed with you over the last year, I mean, because I always keep an eye on people who have been previous guests on the show, and I also keep an eye on potential guests for the show, and this is a big part of the reason why I wanted you to come back, was that I just started to notice that suddenly you were shipping more, things were turning around, you were building all these things, and it was like, this is not the Dave Ursillo I knew 2 years ago. Something has clearly changed. So talk to me, one, about sort of, I mean, you're in this sort of painful process where a book has failed, you have a follow-up book, and it's still not, to the best of my knowledge, like it wasn't thriving.
Right.
It was, you're still kind of, I remember when Literati came out, that was the first sort of sign I saw that, wait a minute, this thing looks like it's about to turn around. So walk me through the turnaround process. Yeah,
you're absolutely right, Srini. So, I mean, the second book, I published it when I was living in New York City. This is I was living there in 2012. So this is the summer of 2012. I put the book out there quietly. It was kind of just like you said, really wanting to enjoy the process of writing, or really wanting to enjoy the process of creating something, being proud of it, sharing it with people, and watching them feel what I wanted them to feel, or what I hoped that they might feel. Because Lord knows, a book about spiritual poetry isn't for everybody, but that was a really rewarding process. And I think that instance of me writing in a new voice, I mean, that summer, living in New York City, my business was legitimately failing. I was running out of money. I had $2,000 in rent that I could not afford by any stretch of the imagination. And all the ideas I had for business, I had coaching clients, and it was just all going in the shitter. Very eloquent, poetic way to say it. But the book, I felt like it gave me permission again to do something that wasn't leadership oriented, because for a long time I was still beating my head against the wall with trying to do something leadership, personal leadership related. so it's the summer, and I realized that I need to go back to my roots as a writer. This is why I quit my job. I was dying to be a writer, to write and to help people communicate better, and to use written word, but even spoken word, to get more connected with your true self, your truth, and also to be more understood by others around you, more understood by the world. So I was talking to my friend, a mutual friend of ours. Her name is Jenny Blake. She is formerly of Life After College. That's her old blog, which she still, of course, writes for. And now she's at jennyblake.me, and she's an amazing human being, former guest on this show, yoga teacher, and she's been a blogger on our level, Srini, right? Where we just kind of been on the journey together. And Jenny and I were walking through the streets of Manhattan, and I said, Jenny, I am failing as a writer because I'm not writing, and I'm failing as an entrepreneur because I'm not making any money. So basically, I'm a big failure right now. What advice do you have for me? And she said, well, listen, Dave, if you want to be writing more, you need to start just doing it. But what if you give yourself a reason to have to write more? What if you start just like a small writers group of like a Facebook group, 20 people paying $20 a month, and boom, there's some cash in your pocket you have on hand every month. It's guaranteed. It's low cost. It's like no cost. And it's just money in your pocket every day. And I was like, Jenny, you are so damn brilliant. Thank you. I'm going to run with this idea. About a month later, I emerged from the bowels of my New York City apartment with what I called the Literati Writers Group. And instead of it being $20 a month, it was started as small as $50, but for a quarter, for 3 months. Mm-hmm. And I wanted it to be an online writers group that would function as a support system for a writer somewhere in the world who not only wanted to write more and make them keep themselves accountable, but connect with other writers like them and listen to interviews with other authors, but specifically wanted to structure their creative journey around the journey being the reward. And that is so remarkably strange and foreign and different an idea for writers groups, which are for the most part, very much competitive, full of, explicitly built-in critiquing and reviews that can be just outright malicious for no reason, Srini, like we're talking about with these Amazon reviews, and this belief that, this sort of cultural belief that a lot of artists maintain, that you need to be suffering and struggling and told that you suck and be ashamed of what you want in order to be a quote-unquote artist. And I said, fuck that. Like, that's ridiculous. I want to make a writers group that's about lifting people up, because I know, for me, that written word has been my saving grace. It saved me from depression. I've been able to build what was, at the time, a floundering, failing business from it, but I was able to do something with my life thanks to my ability to write and understand myself and communicate clearly with people. And over a year later, that writers group, the membership price has quadrupled. We've had more than 80 plus writers from over 7 countries come and go. We have like between 40 and 50 members at any given time. We've interviewed, dozens of amazing authors. It's been an absolutely enlightening experience. We published our first book, a collaborative book, in the summer of 2013, that Mars Dorian, the German designer, did the cover for us. Srini, I know he did your book cover as well, and is doing some branding for the new podcast redesign. So, and that book was number 2 in creativity on Amazon and number 3 in creativity and genius when it launched. It's called Before You Quit Writing, Read This. So we just kind of, it's been life changing for me. It's been reaffirming, but it's taken me as an artist, taken me as an entrepreneur to a level that I was dying to get to for so long. And it's funny because sometimes it's the ideas that a friend like Jenny Blake will feed you, that you run with, that save you. It's something that's never planned. It's something it's just a shot in the dark. And by the grace of the universe, I was able to pick myself up.
Okay, I love this. I mean, well, there's a lot of stuff here that's really eye-opening to me. One is that I think it's worth sort of just mentioning grit, right, in this entire process, because you could have stopped before you had that day to walk with Jenny Blake and that idea would have never showed up. And, Jonathan Fields and I talked about this. He said, it's the willingness to stay in something so far past when the average person would quit. And that's something that I think I really appreciate about your story through this, is just an absolute display of grit in this. But I love that you sort of looked at this and said, instead of a writers group where there's an outcome, I'm going to create a writers group where that is all about the journey becoming the reward. And so what I'm curious about is one, really getting people to buy into this vision, bringing them along for this journey. Let's talk about the tactical sort of approach to building the literati. I mean, you kind of gave us a high level stuff, but let's get into the nitty gritty of it, because I think that's what people are going to want to hear is people sitting, because plenty of people are sitting on ideas that are small. And I want to talk about how you go from small to what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely, Srini. Great question. And so, I mean, all the things I've learned, geez, where do I begin? But here are the key values that I knew that I wanted to build into the Literati Writers Group. I didn't really know how I would build them in, but I knew that I needed them to be part, because it's a part of my core philosophy as a writer, as an entrepreneur, as a human being, my beliefs in leadership we've talked about. I believe that freedom and choice needed to be an integral part of this writers group. So that meant, even though I think, Srini, you can agree with me on this, in terms of selling something, we naturally assign a much higher perceived dollar value to being told what to do than being told that we can do it. And by that I mean, it's much easier to sell a digital course that has steps, worksheets, and tangible outcomes. It's all about those tangible outcomes, right? And that's one formula for doing something. It's not the end-all, be-all. But what I realized is, in the course of, because I dabbled for a while with having like homework and assignments in the group, and what I realized was, after a few months of experimenting with that, because we naturally do, we just think that being told what to do by a figure of authority must be worth more money, because otherwise, if they're not telling us what to do, then how do I figure out what I'm doing? And what I realized in my writers, in the literary writers, this was like January, February of last year, that they all started to privately express to me a deep anxiety that they weren't doing enough, that they were failing, that they weren't accomplishing the goals, that they were failing me as their leader because they weren't doing enough. And I blew up that whole structure of giving them weekly do this in the Facebook group of we have writing prompts that are delivered by email every week, and that would contain like an assignment. And what it was creating, the reverse effect that I wanted, which was for writing and creativity and artistry to be a freeing force that made someone feel like they were alive, like they were themselves. And instead, these homework assignments, these exercises were making people feel incompetent, unworthy, ashamed, and anxious because they weren't doing enough. And Lord knows we give ourselves so much to do. We put such a burden of pressure on ourselves to constantly create like factory lines and be pumping out things like we're machines. And that's one example of this was not creating freedom. I had to blow that up. So now the literati writers, I mean, talk about the journey being the reward. It's a never-ending thing. It's an ongoing year-round writers group where we have a private Facebook group for discussion. It's where everybody gets to know one another. We have weekly emails that I send personally to the entire group. I call it a writing prompt. It's sort of like it's a cue. It's a one-liner. They're all grouped by theme, and it's something that can just remind you to write on your own or inspire you to think through a subject, but it's a subject that's about writing or creativity that can easily relate to life. So you don't actually have to open up your notebook, your Moleskine, a blog post, and perform or do anything to satiate me as the leader. I just want you to remember that you can choose to write or you can choose to not write. And you're choosing, and that's the beautiful part. And that's ultimately what this group is about, is I'm trying to teach people to choose, to make sound decisions that you are not regretting, that you're proud of because they reflect what you want, what you need, and what you desire. And ultimately, Srini, I think that's why I teach what I teach about writing and creativity, is because they're so powerfully, these themes are so powerful in reflecting back to us more of ourselves. And choice, free choice, and freedom, I think, are all really important aspects of being more you and just in living your life according to what you want, need, and desire.
I love this. I think it's so different than the answer I was expecting, because it wasn't sort of a step-by-step, here's how I did it, but it kind of really is more centered around a lot of what you've talked about throughout our conversation, which is around sort of, the values. I think one of the things that I'm very curious about, it's interesting, you went from sort of the tangible outcome of worksheets and all this thing. I mean, the fact that, one, you had the awareness to recognize that, hey, this is actually making people feel like crap. And it's like, hey, I'm paying somebody to make me feel guilty.
Right.
And stripping that. So I think that there's two questions that come for me from that. One is, how can people recognize what people need from them in their own work when they're, how do you figure that out? I mean, like, what were the threads that kind of made, revealed that to you? And if other people are looking at that, how can they do that within their own work to create an experience that people just can't help but love,
right?
Create, what I call an unmistakable or unforgettable experience.
Yeah, absolutely, Srini. Great question. So remember at the top of our conversation, we talked about listening to people's words, and through the words that they use, you can really sense how you can sense their values, and you can sense how their values within the scope of the conversation are being met or not being met. And through emails from literati writers, personal conversations. I mean, I personally work with every one of the literati writers, and I have a welcoming call with them for about 30 minutes to an hour when they come into the group, and I ask them, tell me your story. And I listen to their story from top to bottom, and then I say, okay, well, tell me your relationship with writing. Tell me what I can do for you within the scope of writing and your story. What do you need right now? And it's not always about, hey, I'm going to write a book. It's like it spans. Sometimes it's a newly single mother of 3 kids who doesn't know why she wants to explore writing, but she feels in her gut that writing gives her some capability of finding and understanding what her natural voice is as a human being in her life. And listening to the words, it's all slowly revealed a picture of what it is what the core values are. How should I say this? Basically, it showed me why people joined the group when they didn't know why they were joining the group, and it was these underwriting, but very real values about feeling freedom, being wholly, totally, unapologetically yourself, really owning your desires and your dreams, never needing to apologize for what you believe, never breaking somebody else down because that they think differently than you, totally just being a source that uplifts, that leads by example, that leads without followers in your everyday life, and making the journey the reward. And it's funny because, like, what does that actually mean? And we talked about this, Srini, before we started, that when you're talking about the journey being the reward, it means it's never ending. And it means you almost, in spite of all your dreams and goals that are in the future and everything that's happened in the past, you really need to get clear on what you're feeling and experiencing, wanting and needing right now. It's why I practice yoga. It's because I can't stand it 99% of the time, but it always is showing. It's always showing me what I'm feeling, what I need, and this part of my body just feels terrible. I'm weak today. Why do I have a raging headache? It's constantly showing me, and I don't always complain like that all the time, but it just happens that that's some of the things you think about when you're on the yoga mat and in these awkward positions and about to fall on your face. And writing is really similar in that regard, because you have to choose to write, and when you choose, you're revealing something about yourself, and you have to be honest with yourself. And it's such a reflective process that reveals to you more of what's going on within you right now. And I believe, Srini, in the end, that joy and love can only happen in this present moment. It's where you have to start. It's the only place where you can actually cultivate love, share love, give love. You can experience happiness in bursts and little moments, but the overarching feeling that I experience joy in my life from my work, from my play, from just being me, just from being alive. It can only be felt and experienced in this moment. And so becoming abundantly aware of where you are in your head, in your heart, and in the world is just about everything. For me, writing is the means is just one small, itty-bitty, creative form of sensing that. For other people, it might be singing or painting or dancing. It might be travel, globe trotting. It might be just being in love, being in a relationship, having a family, taking care of kids, being in nature. There's so many different things, but I think that all of them, all these different, call it a hobby, passion, pastime, vocation, mission, they are all meant to show us more of what is going on right in this present moment right now, and that's why it's why I write. But I think when you can help people feel more of what's going on in this moment through the work that you do, you're giving them a profound gift, because our minds just want to go everywhere else. Our minds want to go everywhere else. We want to constantly live in the future. We want to be in the past. Being the moment is so damn difficult. But if you can give them an ounce of awareness, truth, just where they can realize what's going on within them, what they're thinking and feeling, just reflect that back to them, doors open. And that's where I think this writers group has really shown me in a really small way, but it's really revealed to me a lot about myself and people more broadly through business and artistry.
Awesome. I love it. I'm not even going to touch it. So one other final question around this. I mean, obviously you've taken all of this and now you've expanded it into your first live event. Like I said, our journeys really do parallel each other.
Yeah.
And so talk to me about that, and then we'll start closing things up.
Absolutely, Srini. So, I told you that my goal over 2014 is I'm actually looking to expand the Literati Writers to about between 100 and 150 members, where I want to put a hard cap, and the writers group will be basically by invitation only when we reach that stage. But from this group, I've had a lot of people that have been asking me, can we do a retreat? Can we do an event where we and I've gone to New York City and I've pulled people together, about 10 literati writers, and we've gone to book launch events. We've gotten together out in Portland over the summer for different conferences and stuff. So we've gotten together, but I really wanted to explicitly cultivate an event for the literati writers, but our friends who also aren't members, and just really vibe on this wavelength. So I created a retreat, which is happening January 17th to 19th in West Greenwich, Rhode Island. And people are terrified when I mention January in southern New England, like it's Siberia and at a gulag. But I promise you, it's not going to be like you'll go home. You'll find your way home after. You're not gonna disappear. But the retreat is called Weekend in the Woods, and it's a writing and yoga retreat. Alexandra Franzen, who's a friend, she's an extraordinarily talented communicator, writer, author, sells or leads sold-out workshops across the United States and Canada. She is just an amazingly gifted communicator, and somehow I managed to convince her to come to spend the weekend with us and to lead a workshop of her own. So the whole weekend is about using. Basically, it's about writing and doing yoga and being together and eating good food and just giving yourself the space to be you, and against a beautiful, scenic, wintry backdrop, kind of like Henry David Thoreau at Walden, which is only 50, 60 miles away from Rhode Island here. But the whole idea of the actual workshop is the parallels between body movement, physical practices like yoga, and opening up your natural creative energies. Because I believe, as I mentioned earlier, there's parallels between the two, where I believe to be a practitioner of yoga, no matter what your level of experience is, you really need to trust yourself and listen to yourself in the present moment. And I think that that's the key for writing really well, communicating really clearly, is you need to find that, you tap into that presence and find yourself in the moment in order to be, unapologetically you, as I like to say.
Absolutely brilliant. I love how you've kind of taken all these elements and brought them together to just keep playing a bigger game. So I guess that that'll be sort of my final question before my closing question is one of the things that Greg Hartle and I talked about this on Blogcast FM backstage. We just keep leveling up, right? You go from the book to the next thing to the next thing. Like I went from a book to a conference, and then each thing just is a bigger risk with a potentially bigger reward, but also the failure is much bigger. If you screw up, it's way more public. Like if the Instigator launch after 7 months of talking about it didn't have a soul that signed up, that would feel pretty humiliating.
Right.
And I mean, I think we both have wrestled with those demons. And what I'm curious about is sort of, finding it within yourself, sort of, each little you start with small acts of audacious self-belief, and then you start taking bigger ones. And what I'm curious about is how people get to the bigger ones, in your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about how it's incremental, right? And I remember launching my first, my ebook. There was a collaborated ebook. I think you really, it's in that regard, I don't think you can skip ahead. I think you really need to be tempered in the pace and tempered in your expectations for the pace of your strides. And, talking about the journey being the reward, that old adage, I'm going to keep drilling it into your head. I mean, the most you can do right now is take one step. The most you can do tomorrow is you got to take another step. And just having all these flashes of memories of all the different things that I've done that terrified the shit out of me. And doing this retreat, I'm super excited for it. It's really small. It's only going to be about 10 or 15 people, but I'm outside of my comfort zone. It's not even my zone of genius, like event planning and working with retreat contracts and all these different things. It's terrifying me. I've stayed up at night a few times within the last few weeks just thinking about it. You really need to start from exactly where you are. There's nowhere else to begin, and you need to consistently make those little steps and take those little victories in stride. And I think you'll be ready when you're ready, and you'll know when you're ready. And if you're not ready, then you're going to have your first book show you that your first book is just a first book, and not your key to the TEDx stage. It's just all those little strides, and it'll keep you in check if things go awry, if you fail or your expectations you don't meet expectations that you had. I just think that people. I think that cash flow, and I think that how it feels to you deep down will all be those kind of indicating factors that, all right, maybe I wasn't ready for this, but it's no reason to not try. You just need to constantly listen to those factors and give it your best from exactly where you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this comes down to patience, and we're really not patient, is what I've learned. But I think you and I have been on quite a roller coaster ride together. So I'm going to close with my final question, Dave, which you've probably heard me ask a lot of people. Both of us are in an interesting vantage point where we've been around this world for 4 years, and you've mentioned a lot of people like Alex Franz and people like Jenny Blake. Many of who started even some after us. Like there are people who have started after us who have been far more successful. And one of the things that always comes up for me is this constant dichotomy of sort of the people who have everything they want, right? Like they're thriving. And then the people who, kind of honestly in a lot of ways felt like we did throughout this sort of, hey, I'm not where this X person is at. And what I'm curious is, having made such a, drastic turnaround, what do you think it is that separates the people who get to where they want from the ones who don't?
It's a great question, and I wish I knew the answer because I would take so many shortcuts to get where I want to go. I think, my honest opinion is I just think that some people maybe they're faster learners than I am. I know people are much smarter than I am. I think some of the people I've mentioned in the course of our call today are just so intuitive, cunningly brilliant, not in like a villainous sort of a way, being cunningly brilliant, just being really perceptive and adaptive and responsive. I think we all deal with uncertainty and the unknown to various degrees. I know for me, I talked about being an artist and feeling that sense of empathy and connection to people. I'm a deeply empathetic person, and I think that that's a gift for me as a writer and a storyteller. But sometimes it drags me down. Sometimes it's something that I need to keep in check when I'm working with business. I'm making that major leap, and I just feel so damn like on the edge of just collapsing into myself because I'm just so terrified of what I don't know and how I'm going to figure it out. And just knowing that those moments are always going to be there. But I don't really know. All I know, Srini, is that this experience is my own, and I'm finally in a place where I feel like I'm genuinely owning it. And I've owned it every step of the way, but I've owned it in major failures and, like I said, the fuck-ups and falling down. And I think I've just been willing to fail and fuck up and fall down, and that's helped me get where I'm going. For me, the best way, the only way I've really known how to learn is by trying and just figuring it out as I go. And sometimes that's a very slow, methodical process. But I think that the position that I'm in today, and it sounds like the position that you're in today as well, I really want to help people get where I can see them going or where they want to be going without needing to go through the years of suffering and struggle. Those years are always going to be there. There's never going to get to a point where you have, quote unquote, made it. And like you said throughout this call, Srini, like, I'm going to hang up this phone and go back to doing my work, and nothing's gonna promise that tomorrow it'll all work out. But I just got to keep going. I got to keep taking those baby steps, and I got to keep remembering that the journey ultimately is the reward. There's no land that I'm going to find that's going to give me everything that I think will make it easy or just luxurious. And because that's the life that I've ultimately chosen for myself. It's leading without followers. That whole philosophy is just doing, just going, just keep going. And as long as I'm just keeping on, as the saying goes, then I got to chalk that up to a success. No matter what anybody else is doing around me, I wish them all the best. They can buy the drinks if they're rolling in the money. But other than that, I just got to keep doing what feels right by me and helping people achieve that same effect.
Awesome. Well, Dave, I think that makes just a beautiful way to sum up our conversation. I just want to say I can't thank you enough for coming back to our show for a second time and sharing some of your insights with our listeners. It's been really exciting to watch this whole turnaround happen for you.
Thanks, man. It's been an absolute honor. It's my pleasure. I'll be back anytime you need me, anytime you want me, anytime you want to just take the leash off and let me talk endlessly, because I have that ability. But I'm here for you. I'm here for you, the listener. And I would encourage everybody, if you want to drop me a line, Dave@daveursillo.com is the best way to email me. My inbox is almost always empty. Knock on wood. I don't know where all the emails come from that everybody gets drowned by, but happy to talk with you. Check out the Literati Writers to be a welcome addition to our community at literatywriters.com. And other than that, onward and upward from here.
All right. And for those of you guys listening, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we'd be really grateful for an iTunes review if you haven't left one, and we will close the show with that.
Thanks for listening in on another candid conversation at The Unmistakable Creative. Embrace your inner misfit. Express your creative voice. And remember, the goal isn't to live forever, but to create something that will.